Most people who try to learn a language quit within the first month. Not because languages are hard, but because they either do too much too fast, or they copy the model they learned in school, which was never enjoyable to begin with. This video is about the path that actually works. It's 4 steps, in order, and it's the same path every time you learn a language, regardless what, and that's what it looks like. The first thing you do is get your word list. It's 200 words, not 1,000, not 500, it's just 200. These are the words that appear across almost every context in your target language, regardless of what you're reading, or watching, or talking about. They're not random, they're the ones that show up everywhere, every time. Then you add 50 more. These come from you specifically, from whatever you actually want to do with language. If you want to read the Pokemon manga, which is what I'm planning to do, your 50 words come from Pokemon. If you want to watch cooking shows, they come from cooking. Whatever the interest is, those are your 50. Together you have 250 words, and that's the foundation. Day 1 looks like this. You find the 200 word list, there's the free version in the description, you decide what hobby you're going to tie the language to, and then you find your 50 interest words. And then you start. First you start with 5 words, that's it. 20 minutes, 5 words, done. Because the goal is to make you do that every day for 50 days. That's the boring part. It's the only boring part as well. It has to be boring. Because the goal is not to make week 1 exciting, it's to make week 1 easy enough that you're still doing it in week 8. Atomic Habits, which is a book written about how to make habits stick the simple way by starting small, gets this right. You don't start everything at once, you do it small, and then you build on it. That's the easy way to sustain it. A lot of people try to do too much in week 1 because they have the time and motivation. The problem is they're building a routine that only works when they have time and motivation. That's not a routine, that's a sprint. And sprints end. 5 words, 20 minutes, 50 days. At the end of those 50 days, you have 250 words. And on day 51, everything changes. You stop studying, you start consuming. Here's where the 50 words really matter. So you pick one piece of content, something you already love, manga you've prepared vocab for, or a show you've already watched, a game you already know, and familiarity really matters. If you already know the story, the language has to do less work to make sense. You're getting context for free. Start reading or watching 1 chapter, 1 episode, no more than that in the beginning. Because the goal is to keep it enjoyable, not to make it a new form of homework. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hit words you don't know, and every instinct is going to tell you to stop, to look it up and translate it, just to figure it out. My advice is don't. Keep going. If you're understanding roughly 80% of what's on the page, you're exactly where you need to be. The other 20% will fill in through context over time. That's not a gap in the method. That is the method. The 80% rule is also your signal that you're in the right zone. If you're too far below that, the content is too hard. If you're above it comfortably, you can start to push speed. You can start to push. Speed up the content, move to something slightly harder in the same genre, or branch to a different genre at the same difficulty level. What you don't do is jump to harder content and pick a new genre. Pick one variable, and that's the thing that you're changing. The honest version of step 2, the first few days of reading or watching in a new language feels slow. That's not the language failing you, that's you not yet being used to reading without translating. Push through those first few days without being strict on yourself about how much you need to get through. The goal should be simple, something like 1 chapter, and that's enough. And once you're used to the pace, something shifts. It stops feeling like studying. It starts feeling like the thing you'd be doing anyway, just in a different language. That's when you know it's working. The sign that you're actually retaining things, by the way, is not that you know every word on the page. It's that you see a word you haven't encountered in a week, and you still know what it means. That's retention. That's the method doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, at some point, and this is different for everyone, you'll be ready to speak. The signal is not a date, it's not a month, it's not like you start month 3 or session 40. The signal is that 80% comprehension point. When you can follow most of what you're reading or watching, and you're handling harder content without falling apart, you're ready to start producing language, not just consuming it. Start small, send a message in target language to an AI, have a slow text-based conversation, and give yourself time to think. Don't jump to a live phone call day one. That's the equivalent of jumping the hardest content. That's the equivalent of jumping the hardest content in the hardest genre at the same time. Build the same way you build comprehension, one step, and make it a sustainable pace. What makes a good conversation is low stakes and familiarity. You're talking about something you already know. The Pokemon manga you've been reading, the show you've been watching, you have vocabulary for that. Use it. And here's the thing most people don't expect about speaking. It's not that hard once comprehension is there. The hard part was already done in step 2. You built the recognition. Speaking is just output side of something you already have. The 4th step is speed. Once you can follow content at a normal pace, stop pushing. Speed up your podcasts and shows and read faster. Move to content that you've already challenged, or move to content that challenges you within genres you're already comfortable with. This isn't about rushing. It's about keeping the difficulty calibrated to where you actually are. It's still keeping within that 80%. The instinct when things get hard is to slow down, go back to basics, and review everything. Usually that instinct is wrong. You're past basics. What you need is more repetitions at the current level, not a step backward. Fluency is just repetition. It's the same words and patterns appearing again and again until they stop going through your native language first and start arriving directly via the language that you're reading or listening to. That process can't be shortcut, but it can be made enjoyable. And an enjoyable process is when you'll actually stick with long enough to finish. So here's what this costs. It costs almost nothing. The word list is free. The content you're consuming is content you'll be watching, reading anyway, just in a different language. The only required investment is 50 days of 20-minute sessions up front. After that, you're not studying. You're just living your life with a different language in the mix. That's the path. 250 words, then content you love, then speaking once comprehension is built, then speed in order, and it's the same every time you start learning a new language. Everything you need to follow this path is on this channel. If you want to do it with a community around you, that's linked in the description as well.